just to thank you. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. It's one of my first outings after COVID. So I'm glad you're all there, but not too many and quite separate, because that way we are going to keep confinement distancing. No, I'm joking. I think nothing replaces being present. And the way I've understood your invitation was more like an exchange of experiences, inquiry, and discussion. So it's for me, it's really not so much a conference as really let's talk about it. Let's keep working on what is important for media literacy. It's true that at the moment I'm very happy to see the work done in the past years by me and a lot of my colleagues at the working group for the EU, creating the whole guidelines and then creating also the observatory, to see that it's coming to fruition, and that it's coming to fruition the way we've always wanted it to be, which is to say at least at European scale, because these issues are shared and they are deeply democratic. As a result, it cannot be done alone. And my vision of media literacy has always been multi-stakeholder and transnational and transcultural. So it explains why suddenly Savoir-devenir found itself mixed with a Belgian project. And it's because partly when we created Savoir-devenir and as an association, not as a chair, the idea was to respond to the needs of civil society associations that were in the field for a long time, and other associations that don't do media literacy but have it among their missions, like in France, for instance, Ligue de l'Enseignement, in Belgium and France, CMA, etc., but suddenly found themselves sort of naked in the face of disinformation, polarization, radicalization, where suddenly all the former approaches to media literacy that were very balanced, it's about opportunities and risks, etc., everything seemed to be thrown to the garbage can, and we had to rethink everything, our processes, etc. So Savoir-devenir as an association is a plug-in. We come and help other associations that need upscaling, and we try to produce resources for them so that they can disseminate. So this is how we try to bridge things. And it came out of the chair because the chair was suddenly required to do much more than it was supposed to do at university. And I had to do something that we do a lot in media literacy, as researchers and activists, find some kind of a solution to both be credible and legitimate in terms of research or scientific approach or theoretical approach, and be legitimate to people on the field because you're near them. The proximity, the authenticity that I think all of us who are in media literacy like. And I think with EDMO, you're probably finding yourself doing that at BELUX, and with the mix that you have of universities, civil society organizations, etc., etc. It's not always easy to dialogue and to feedback on each other, but I think this is what we all have to strive for, because we have an opportunity to do something new in terms of how we relate to each other in this field, and this field can then change society in a more deeper way. So for me, media and information literacy, I've always said it, has a transformative power to make us move into the 21st century at last. Because in case you haven't noticed, we haven't yet been there. Okay, so this is because we are chatting. I wouldn't say that publicly, even though I know we're taped. But it's just to set the tone of where I think, where I am, definitely. And I've always seen media literacy as a frontier field, which is to say a field that is constantly changing, partly because media change. And so it's part of the challenge and the pleasure of being in media literacy, and it's part of the problem, is that big organizations in media literacy always feel that they are at the last media change, and you need some people to consider the frontiers. So it's not an emerging field, it's a frontier field. That can be part of a discussion. Okay? And one of the questions is, for me, and I'd like to share it with you today, is going into algo-literacy, is it male? Or is it another literacy, yet another one? And how do we deal with all these new words that have literacy appended to them? And it's funny how, especially among the French here, the word literacy was not welcome 4 or 5 years ago, and now there's a plethora of literacies coming up. And so how do we deal with it? And how do we talk to the others about how to put them into some framework that makes sense to them, especially if we want them to embrace it? And it can seem like something overwhelming, it's more than a 4-syllable word. This is very intellectual. How do we make it concrete? How do we make it available to people? And this is where the crossover project comes into play. But first, so continuing and to sort of share with you how we got there. Came at the moment where I was writing about where we were standing with disinformation, and the feeling that disinformation was reshaping, misshaping, was really hurting headstrong male in ways that were unexpected, to the point that lots of little associations and new groups were being created in a kind of frenzy, and not making things very clear for the older, more traditional associations. And I came up with 3 elements that have touched a lot of people. They come back again and again telling me, oh my God, thank God you said it, because we were thinking it, but we didn't know how to phrase it or formulate it. And it was this idea from the male community that this is not male. News literacy is reductive. We don't do just that. So journalists are embracing it. Great. We've already always talked to journalists, but this is not us. We're not only dealing with disinformation. We're also talking about identity online and privacy and creativity, etc. This is all gone to the drain, and we've fought for generations of media literacy activists to make sure that this positive dimension was there. And now it's all negative. It's all angst. It's all worries. So there was a lot of people who were resisting, in fact, almost the news literacy approach, and saying it's not us. Let it to the journalists. Then speaking with the digital journalists, I have a constant dialogue with them, because some of them say, yeah, we are fact checkers. But some fact checkers are saying, we're not journalists. We are developers. We are data scientists. We are number crunchers, etc., etc. Journalism is a side effect of what we do. Yeah, you're aware of this discourse or this discussion. It's out there, and it's fine, but it's out there. And then there's all of these people were saying, but what's wrong with this picture? All the numbers we receive, the data we receive, say that in the flow of social media flux, disinformation is 4 or 5%, represent 4 or 5% of that mass, and it's capturing the whole conversation. Where's information gone? Where's good, sound, quality information, science, etc. gone? So also this concern. And I don't know if you feel that or if you perceive that in Belgium and Luxembourg, but that's definitely coming back again and again. And so this idea among actually a lot of fact checkers now, they're saying we have to go to information, and we have to go for quality information, and it will solve the rest. And hence the new spin now, especially in funding, for funding scientific inquiry-based fact-checking and things like that. So really moving to the science dimension of information instead of opinions instead of fakes. So this is a part of the discussion, framing the discussion. And then from prior research and prior projects we've had at Savoir-devenir, like You Check or You Verify, where we were already working with Agence France Presse, for instance, and with a very smart tool called Invid We Verify, we also got returns from the teachers and educators, and they were telling us, yes, these tools are reassuring. So that was a positive thing. Oh, wow, 5 years ago, we didn't even know how to tackle the goddamn thing. Now there is something like Invid. Oh, now there is something like the dashboard. So something is going on. Politico, I mean, there's several tools that have emerged. But their returns was, we're not journalists, we're not developers. We don't have time, we're not trained. Deal with that. We want easy-to-use examples that we can take and incorporate in when we have 2 hours, when we have so this sort of a modular approach. We're willing to do it, and a lot of teachers are willing to do it, much more than their administration. Talk about that later. But what they wanted was databases, easy-to-use examples, etc. And they actually trusted inviting people in the classroom, like journalists or independent NGOs, etc., than, for instance, the platforms themselves or government-based institutions like Canopé or things like that in France, for instance. And they were willing to dialogue, which is I think, is a new trend. When given the opportunity, they were willing to dialogue with the developers, which is feedback. Okay, we are not, this tool of yours, too complicated, implementing it in the classroom takes too much time, not all students follow, blah, 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 etc., etc. But if you give us a chat box and we meet some examples and we have some questions, we'll send them to you, which is interesting in terms of, if you want, multi-stakeholder dialogue that we're trying to create in media literacy. And then, of course, we had to ask ourselves, yes, but algo-literacy, sometimes it comes from somewhere else, and you can go to the last OECD approach, which also came up with some research findings that show the same thing: a low level of confidence. We're not sure we can manage. We're not sure we understand enough the complexity. We need robust evaluation systems. The algorithms are so opaque. How do you transfer more transparency to the students, etc.? And there are a few competency frameworks out there, but they really are unfocused. I'll show you in a minute. But there are working definitions out there of algo-literacy when you want to think about them and thinking about how does it fit with media literacy. And you can see that the first one, curation, control, okay, maybe developers can do that. Teachers, not really. Librarians, maybe, but again, they're not professionals and they'll tell you that. The second one is more interesting because it's about strategies. It's about comparing, it's about protecting privacy, etc. And in fact, the second one can be turned into a definition for media and information literacy because it emphasizes the possibility of coping with algorithms, changing behavior, and as a result, we get to where I would like us to get, which is to say to integrate media and information literacy into MIL rather than a separate literacy. In fact, for me, algo-literacy is going to be divided in two different fields. The one of computing, which has its own track and is already happening, and the one of computational thinking and knowing how computers, the algorithms work for your users and practices, which is what we need, most of us need. So this is, again, the different strands that we're trying to bring together. Wait, can you see anything? Well, anyways, that's going to send you to the DigiComp 2.2. In terms of frameworks, I looked at the one that is sort of a reference for Europe, and to which I happen to have contributed, especially in the version 2.2, which includes data, which is my theory of media literacy, and we'll come back to theory in a minute. But the idea that information and data are part of the crux here, and when you look at what they propose, it's just extremely vague. So the way the competences are described are like that. There's a description, then there is examples for knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Because at the EU, we take this vision of competences, that a competence is made of three parts: knowledge, some things that you have to know, skills, attitudes, do you change your behavior, and I always add values, because we're doing this for a reason: freedom of expression, privacy, dignity, you name it. So at Savoir-devenir, we always say it's a butterfly and it has 4 wings. If it has 3, it doesn't fly. But, and believe me, I've pushed that with the EU. The EU say if we add values, not all countries are going to adopt it. I'll let you imagine which ones they are. Not that far. You notice that I'm in blue and gold. Anyway, so the competence framework, as I was saying, there's a few existing, but for teachers, they are hardly usable. They're still a little bit too abstract. So we tried at Savoir-devenir to interpret, and often what happens with teachers is that they'll have a general framework and they're happy because they know they're moving towards a shared vision, and it's very important for teachers, but for everybody, to know that we're sharing a vision of the world, of what media are, etc. So we try to propose something that is a little bit more attitude-oriented, a little bit more valued-oriented, about asking about responsibility, self-regulation of algorithms, being able to communicate, finding editorial responsibility, looking at business models, etc., to make sure diversity, pluralism of social media. You see how we're incorporating the values in there without being too strict and letting a certain amount of choice. These are still meta competences in terms of what people do, break them out into micro competences, and this is the next step. But you see how we need to think, and this is part of, for me, workshopping with you. And we can discuss it again, and you can come up with your own. We need to think of how we can give indications to teachers and adults who are working with younger people, maybe adults who are working with adults, to place it within the kind of language that they know, with this idea that a competence base enables also easier evaluation at the end. This is what we were trying to make sure people were acquiring. Are we finding this at the end? So that's why we are working in this direction. And again, this is work in progress. It may change, especially after today's discussion. But that is the idea. So after this thinking and this theoretical approach, as you can see, bringing in several strands, the idea was how do we deal with that? And so we responded to the invitation of EU Disinfo Lab to join them in this European project, whose main thrust, nonetheless, is done by Check First, which is to say developing a tool, a smart tool, to understand how algorithms push recommendation on information, including disinformation, and on our side, trying to deal with how would we transfer, how would we transpose what they're doing for media literacy groups. And we were aiming mostly at young people 15 plus. So here you have the project that is with the dashboard. Nelly is here, so she may have a better way of explaining the dashboard. Anyways, but basically it's actually a fairly user-friendly tool, even if you're not a professional. And we can discuss with Nelly a bit later. There's this idea that it will be put at the disposal of people who can feed it with keywords, etc. It's still very much in development, though it has already produced advanced results. But anyways, the idea is to be able to compare across several social media, sort of imitating almost people's behavior on social media. So I have my YouTube channels, and then I have my Facebook feeds, etc., what is happening there, and to use this for investigations. And so when we started thinking the media literacy part of this, again, we went back to the principles that I've been mentioning to you, theoretical and practical, using the research returns from previous research, ours and others actually. So our guiding principles are here. A modular approach. As you know, media literacy is not yet a discipline, though we've managed to put it now in the guidelines of DGAAC as a transversal and disciplinary approach. But it's sure that for teachers, what they want is the possibility of having a short, modular sets of formats that they can include in different shapes in their own course, be it math, be it history, be it French or Flemish. The idea of authenticity, which is very much a media literacy approach, we use real cases, real life cases. We're experience-based in media literacy. We're based on the uses and practices of young people, of adults, etc. So we can't make them up. It's not a lab experiment, which of course creates problems for experimentation, but so what? So we are having authentic documents and example. We are embracing the fact that it's a complex issue and cannot be solved by the teacher alone or young persons alone. We need a multi-stakeholder approach. So we have Disinfo, fact-checkers, we have Check First, developers and journalists, we have Apache, journalists, and we have us, media experts, media literacy experts, plus the teachers. That's it. So you see already the soup in which we are, but it's it's palatable in the end, hopefully. But it's really learning to get out of the school environment, which is very bunkerized, very closed in, and you know that finding safe spaces is no longer even an option in classrooms. Thank you, Samuel Paty. So anyways, the idea that we still have to learn to dialogue with different competences, different types of professionals, and make it possible for teachers to get out, or to others to get in, and this kind of thing. The competence-based approach, and you've seen that it's a work in progress. The spirit of inquiry, and one of the reasons we joined the project was this idea that there was going to be investigation without knowing the results necessarily. But we were telling ourselves, if we want to give a taste for science, a taste for truth, a taste for sound opinion building and constructing, etc., the best thing is to play on the curiosity of young people and to instill a spirit of inquiry. Why? How? Etc. And then the responses will take care of themselves. But this idea of, which implies, okay, algorithms are opaque, so what? We don't go? Well, yes, we go. But we can't go alone, so we find allies. and alliances. So that was this idea also. The idea that goes together with critical and creative and reflexive learning. And as I was telling you, a focus on information, not so much disinformation, and uses and practices. Our idea is not to stop algorithms. Hey, c'est plus fort que toi, comme dirait l'autre in French, but to stop amplification. And hopefully create counter-narratives based on values, respect, truth, sound science, blah, blah, blah. So we thought about the kit as a kit, IKEA. You have different sets of formats because you don't know how the teacher is going to do it. So you need to have things that stand alone, like quizzes, responses, no punishment, you haven't done it, you've done it wrong, you try again, etc., etc. And the quizzes for us are only the knowledge base. In the 4 competences, they only are about knowledge. They are to make sure that they know the basics of recommendation, ranking, and things like that. Articles produced by journalists, that's the authenticity part. These are real cases done by real journalists with a real use of a dashboard. It's not fiction, it's not lab, etc. Podcasts to bring also the authenticity, but also the complexity. We have journalists who say how they did it, the developers who says this is what we thought we were doing, and the male experts who say, well, this is what we can keep for ourselves in the classroom. So, it's not perfect, again, but it's this idea there can be a dialogue, there can be a discussion with these people, and you can use it, you can make young people listen to it. And so the work plan says exactly that. It says, well, if you have half an hour, send them on the quiz, and then discuss about it, what they've learned, what they thought they knew, etc., etc. If you can do it the flipped way, the inverted classroom way, make them read the article, make them listen to the podcast when they're coming to school in the transportation or walking in the streets, and then we talk about it. And so we provide the script and ideas for discussion, for debate, etc. in the work plan document. And there will be at the end, hopefully with the help of all the other partners, a sort of infographics summing up in 10 points about what's all to remember. That's the idea of the set. All right? So we have at the moment 2 of the 4 modules, each of one having a podcast, an article, quizzes, and the workshop plan based on 2 real cases that have been interesting for dashboard people and Check First and for Apache, therefore for us, because it brought back unexpected results, or results that needed to be fine-tuned about how algorithms worked, recommendation, etc. So one was about the Freedom Convoy, and we realized that there was a big contrast between what the real world was doing, the real world mobilization, and what the virtual world was saying, which is to say basically revolution. So, sobering. And interesting from a perspective of how powerful or not powerful disinformation is. So, again, very calming down, I think, about that. And the second one that is done but is not yet available online is more about propaganda because of the event that you have all followed, and which was the banning of RT during the war in Ukraine, and the fact that suddenly we saw other state media emerging, as if, as Check First put it, there was a kind of addiction of the algorithms to that kind of media. So again, using real events for that. The next 2 are not going to be so much about inquiry as about reflexivity. They arrived almost at the end of the project. So the third one in preparation is going to be about the journalists who are going to speak in the podcast what it was to work with a dashboard. How did it change their practices? What they learned, what was good, what was not good, etc., etc. And the last one, but not least, will be about the developers themselves. How they, because by now the dashboard has, I think, 3, it's the 3rd version. So it has changed. They were responding. They were trying different things, and how they ended up interacting with journalists and a little bit with us in terms of meal experts. And so that will be more reflexive, which is, of course, one of the competences that we try to push in media literacy. And the workshop plans do exactly that, but basically they're embedding all the things I've said in the whole process. And so the teachers and actually youth workers, because there are some of them working with us, have a podcast with a script. They have the broken down sequences with questions they can ask, the suggestions for class activities. They have the quiz, the interactive quiz, and they have the actual newspaper article. And so what we're doing at the moment is that we are trying to break down the framework into applied micro competences, be able to analyze the types of algorithms, be able to interpret the economic models behind that. Why does YouTube go to state media? Why, what, etc., etc. What are the ethical questions? And the idea of how to change attitudes, how to consult a variety of sources, how not to amplify, how to open up to the community around you, the family, etc. So what we call fresh air at Savoir-devenir, air for analyze, interpret, react, because we want people to remember memotechnically to react. The third part of the competences, change attitude, counter, narrate, etc. So it's a little bit how we are considering this, and it feeds, confirms, modifies theory. Because after you've gone through all of this, at some point you have to reflect back and try to think about it in terms of research. And so for me, it's feeding my theory of media literacy, which I call transliteracy, which is to say this convergence at the moment around the 3 information cultures, the media one, the documentation one, the data one, because what we're seeing, especially with this information, is like a real-life experiment. We're seeing how this one is impacting this one. But everything that is online is a doc. Every fake is a transformed image, a modified document, a pixelized, depixelized, compressed, whatever you call it. So it enables, if you want, to understand how looking at the Ukrainian situation, looking at the Freedom Convoy, suddenly you have newspaper, Apache, you have the dashboard, and you have us providing the documents and to look at it and trying to bring it together to understand what the information actually is. Information actually is. So putting information at the center again. And it can be within schools, it can be outside schools, it has to deal with knowledge, attitudes, values. It's trying to make sure that for teachers, they have this global and sort of holistic perspective on information. And so I'm coming to my conclusion. At last for you. Sorry for being so long, but yeah, there's definitely the need, and teachers have expressed it, but again, feeling rather unprofessional about it, and to include algo-literacy now as part of MIL. Clearly, and I hope I've shown you, we're not ready with the frameworks. Lots of refinement is needed and lots more examples, but we have to build examples. We have to build something that we test, etc. And we are going to have focus groups after that on how the teachers have perceived the documents. Definitely what we are hoping is that this is not going to stop the current fight for more transparency in algorithms and in the use of algorithms. Again, the point is not to transform algorithms. They're very useful. Okay, they're an economic asset for all these platforms, fine. But in terms of use, we have to be able to curate them, control them, unless we controlled ourselves. Yep, that's democracy for you. Thank you for your attention. I recommend that you go to Crossover Social. I have a website of a project where you'll find the quiz and the podcasts. Eventually, there'll be the whole kit. Thank you for your attention.